With the Baltimore Ravens training camp starting up in a few days, there are several players currently on the roster who need to have a big showing at camp, not only for their own careers, but for the team's future as well. These players are on offense, defense, and potentially special teams. Training camp is often looked at as simply a precursor to the league for most fans, and while that makes sense, as most of us fans are more removed from the process of roster construction and many of the early practices for the team, training camp is one of the most important events in the lives of many of the players that aspire to have a career in the NFL. The good and the bad part for the players trying to make the roster for the Baltimore Ravens is that while they are attempting to join a team which has Super Bowl aspirations almost yearly, they are also joining an extremely competitive roster with very few holes. But now, let's take a look at the players that need to have a good training camp. Let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. The first player that we're going to be talking about is one whose career with the Ravens has seemingly always revolved around this time of year and whether or not he will live up to the expectations many fans and the coaching staff have for him. Ben Cleveland was drafted in the third round of the 2021 draft. When taken in the draft, many thought Cleveland would already be competing for one of the starting guard jobs, given his size and apparent strength. However, since being drafted, Ben Cleveland has struggled to stay healthy and seemingly struggled to even compete for either of the starting guard positions. Last year, it was thought that the left guard position was Ben Cleveland's to lose early in the offseason, so when the Ravens brought in John Simpson, many fans thought it was simply competition for Ben Cleveland, something to maybe push him a bit more. However, John Simpson did more than push. He competed and won the job outright, holding it for the entire year. Now this year, Ben Cleveland is once again thought to be a projected starter for the right guard position after the Ravens did not extend Kevin Zeitler. Now the right guard position has been Ben Cleveland's best position in the past, but unless Ben Cleveland has a strong showing for the coaching staff in this upcoming preseason, he may never again get a shot at a starting job for the Ravens franchise. The next player we're going to talk about might come as a bit of a surprise, but when you dive into the wide receiver position group, Tylan Wallace's place on the team is not nearly as secure as it was in the past. With the Ravens bringing in Deontay Hardy, many thought this was a signal that he would be the starting returner, putting Wallace in the backup role yet again. However, Wallace does seem to be the better receiving option between the two. With Flowers at the number 1 position, Bateman at number 2, Aguilar at 3, and Walker at the number 4, many think Wallace could still make the team as the 5th or 6th wide receiver. Traditionally, the Ravens have taken 6 wide receivers into the regular season, and with Hardy as the projected return specialist, that would make him one of those. So Tylan would have to lock up that number 6 position in the wide receiver group in order to make the team. The only problem with that is that the Ravens have around 6 players currently fighting for that last spot in camp, including Tylan Wallace. Now, I don't think all 5 of these others have the same chance, but 2 in particular may push Wallace: Dayton Wade and Malik Cunningham. Now, Cunningham is new to the receiver position, but has played well so far, and Wade has impressed early and often. So these 2, in my opinion, are the biggest potential threats to Wallace's 5th or 6th wide receiver spot on the team. Switching over to the defensive side of the ball, we now get a player who needs to have a good camp for the Ravens as an organization going into 2024, and that's linebacker Trenton Simpson. With Patrick Queen leaving in free agency to the Pittsburgh Circles, there is a vacancy next to Roquan Smith in the middle of the defense. When the Ravens drafted the Clemson linebacker last year in the 3rd round, many thought this was PQ's replacement anyway. Simpson has shown an aptitude for the position, coming in against the Steelers in Week 18 last year and being one of the stars of the game for Baltimore. However, one good game does not necessarily mean the starting job is automatically locked up for him. When Trenton was drafted, a concern about him was that at 6'2", 240 pounds, he's undersized for the position. But how many times have we heard that about other players? Goo Stone, Tyler Linderbaum, and Chuck Clark are examples of this narrative in Baltimore. I think the size concern at linebacker is more based around the idea that he wouldn't be able to tackle larger running backs, big body wide receivers, and tight ends. In that Steelers game, we saw that Simpson had no issues tackling Najee Harris, a 6'1", 240-pound back who tries to run through people rather than around them, and Trenton seemed to do just fine. We know that Trenton is fast and smart, so if in training camp he can show the willingness and ability to bring down a guy like Derrick Henry, who he'll be going up against every day, all the Ravens fans' fears and hesitations about Roquan's running mate should be alleviated. Now, the last player I'm going to be talking about is one that we're not sure about yet. Now, I understand if that statement is a bit confusing. How can this be a video about players who need to play well in training camp if the player in question is someone we don't know yet? So let me explain. Last year, the Ravens starting secondary, one of the best in the league, was Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, Kyle Hamilton, and Marcus Williams. Now, all those players are returning this season, but last year Marcus Williams went down with an injury just like he did the season before. And, just like in the season before, his replacement was Goo Stone, who came in and absolutely took over in Marcus Williams' absence. So much so, in fact, that when Marcus actually returned from injury, we still saw a lot of Goo Stone on the field in 3 safety sets. The only problem is that Goo Stone is no longer a Raven. He's a Tiger Bee. The Ravens have not replaced Goo Stone's position nor the production that he gave us, and this is the player that we don't have but need during training camp. Now, who's going to step up and be that third safety for the Ravens in 2024? In the 7th round, the Ravens drafted Sanusi Kane out of Purdue University. A strong safety by nature, Kane is a good tackler and good at bringing pressure, but he doesn't have the coverage skills nor the ball skills to compete in the NFL this year. If Marcus Williams went down, or even worse, Kyle Hamilton, I believe Kane would be a liability in filling in for either at this point. So, who does that leave us with? Well, many fans look at Ardarius Washington as that potential third safety, and while I believe he certainly has the skills and the tenacity to be that player, Washington suffers from the fact that your best ability is availability. Washington and Williams have had similar issues of not being on the field enough in the past 2 seasons for the Ravens. And while I think if he can't stay healthy, the job will most certainly be his, I need to see Washington make it all the way through training camp looking as good as he did in the preseason of last year and staying on the field the entire time. Otherwise, the Ravens might have to make a late move this summer to get another safety on the roster. Training camp is often looked at as some sort of formality for fans, an appetizer, if you will, for the regular season. But for the Ravens, especially this year, training camp is one of the most important parts of the year. This is when the front office hopes that its scouting and roster construction have paid off, and when the coaches will attempt to mold players that they have into the best 53 they can for this year's team. There will be players that underperform, overperform, deal with injuries, and have up and down days. But being able to build consistency, chemistry, and improve in areas of weakness will be the difference for players who are on the bubble between either making the final roster, making the practice squad, or moving on to a different team. Now, as a Ravens fan, my hope is that all 4 of these players I've discussed have strong showings in camp and cement themselves as the starters on this roster, because once these roster positions are set, the real preparations can begin for the 2024 regular season, where the Ravens will again attempt to win the AFC North and ultimately the Super Bowl. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as we take a quick look at the players that I think need to have a strong camp this year. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you're new around here, and comment on which player you think needs to have the biggest performance in camp to make the final 53 for the Ravens. As always, guys, stay safe out there and go Ravens.